The world is full of data, numbers, research, history, family pictures, and your shopping list. Imagine having to go to the supermarket to get ingredients for your favorite fried chicken. To do that, you have to book a cab, go to the supermarket, pay with your card, claim things with your ID, and all that jazz related to data and information. But why should these things be important to you? There are two types of people that deal with personal data. Those who give their data are called data subjects. Those who manage and process personal data, provided directly or indirectly by the data subjects, are called data handlers. This video is about you being a data handler, manager, and protector of personal data. As a data handler, it's your responsibility to ensure that your data subjects' personal and sensitive information, whether it's from your company's clients, vendors, or even your colleagues, are used and kept for the right purposes. If you can be trusted with keeping your data subjects' personal data safe, then your data subject will be more confident in dealing with you as a customer, a supplier, a colleague, or even as a friend. A fundamental rule to being a good data handler is understanding confidentiality. That means you should avoid becoming a leaker. A leaker is someone who discloses the individual's personal data intentionally or unintentionally for the wrong reasons. For example, let's say you've closed a deal with a client to sell him a house, and out of excitement, you post on Facebook a story or a picture of the deal with the transaction documents and all. Of course, that's bad news, especially if there are credit card numbers or any sensitive information in there for the whole world to see. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. There is the Data Privacy Act of 2012 or Republic Act number 10173 for all of us to learn from. It is an act of protecting individual personal information in information and communication systems in the government and private sector, creating for this purpose a National Privacy Commission and for other purposes. In this video, we can learn about the data privacy key terms, principles, data lifecycle, rights of a data subject, penalties, and what to do in case of a breach. The consequences of breaking the data privacy laws is serious business. The unauthorized processing of personal information can result in you having 1 to 3 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 2 million pesos. For sensitive personal information, that goes up to 3 to 6 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 4 million pesos. You wouldn't want to be in that position, so let's get down to business. The National Privacy Commission, also known as the NPC, is an independent body mandated to administer and implement the Data Privacy Act and to monitor and ensure compliance of the country with international standards set for personal data protection. Let's see how we can handle personal data properly from start to the end. This process is called data lifecycle, an end-to-end processing of personal data. The cycle starts with the collection of personal data. You have to think of this question first. Who is my data subject? What are the different types of personal information that I can get from my data subject? Personal information may be any information, whether recorded or not, that can be used to reasonably identify who that information belongs to. For example, someone's name plus his or her birthplace, gender, country of citizenship, citizenship status, address, place of work, payroll and benefits information, location of that individual at a particular time, IP address, and contact information. On the other hand, sensitive personal information refers to an individual's name plus his or her race, ethnic origin, age, color, marital status, religious and political affiliations, education, genetic or sexual life, or any proceeding for any offense committed or alleged to have been committed by him or her, the disposal of such proceedings, or the court sentence of such. Information issued by government agencies peculiar to an individual, which includes, but is not limited to, government-issued ID, previous or current health records, licenses or its denial, suspension or revocation, and tax returns. Now, there's what we call the general data privacy principle for handling these sorts of data. According to this principle, the processing of personal information shall be allowed subject to the compliance of this Act and other laws. Under the data privacy principle is a principle of transparency that states that the data subject must be aware of the nature, purpose, and extent of the processing of the person's data. And this must be easily accessible and understood clearly through plain language. One practice that upholds the principle of transparency is giving privacy notices. A privacy notice is a statement that describes how the data handler collects, uses, retains, and discloses personal information. Another is consent. Consent is present when the data subject freely agrees to the collection and use of his or her personal data. This is where your consent forms and signatures come in. For consent to be evident, it has to be written, electronically, or through other recorded means. These things under data privacy principle point to something very important, the right to be informed. The data subject should be informed of the nature, purpose, basis, the extent of the processing, who the personal data should be shared with, how long the personal data will be kept, and the rights of the data subject. Another important principle, the principle of proportionality. Under this principle, the processing of personal data shall be adequate, relevant, suitable, necessary, and not excessive to the declared and specified purpose. Let's move on to another important step in the data lifecycle, the storage of personal data. After collecting personal data, we're not just going to leave them scattered on the table. That is what storage is for. And there are several technical security measures to make sure personal data is kept safe from any leakers. Examples of technical security measures are digital storage, file backups, approving online access, network security and passwords, and the use of authorized devices and encryption. Physical security measures, on the other hand, means the archiving of personal data in secure places like cabinets with locks, covering the files with materials that protect from man-made and natural disasters, organizing them through room arrangement, and limiting access to the rooms where they are stored. With all these measures in place, this doesn't mean locking out your data subject. The data subject has the right to gain reasonable access to its personal data. This is so that the person can tell whether the processing of personal data is lawful or not. Access to personal data should be user-friendly and easy to do. Next, the data subject has the right to block or erase personal data depending on the following situations. If the personal data is incomplete, outdated, false, or unlawfully obtained, is used for an unauthorized purpose, is no longer necessary for its purpose, if the data subject withdraws his or her consent, objects to the processing, if the processing of the data is found to be unlawful, or if the data handler has violated the rights of the data subject. Should there be inconsistencies or errors in the personal data, the data subjects have the right to rectification, or the right to dispute or correct any error or inaccuracy in his or her personal data. Lastly, the right to data portability allows the data subject to easily obtain, move, copy, transfer, and reuse its data across different services and IT environments. The idea of storing and accessing personal data is pretty straightforward, right? Now here's how you can get in trouble for accessing data information due to negligence, unauthorized access, or intentional breach. The access of personal information due to negligence can get you 1 to 3 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 2 million pesos. For sensitive personal information, expect 3 to 6 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 4 million pesos. The unauthorized access or intentional breach of personal data can get you 1 to 3 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 2 million pesos. You must understand from the principle of legitimate purpose that the personal information must align with the declared and specified purpose that isn't unlawful and not against public policy. The data subject has the right to object to the processing of its data. In processing personal information for unauthorized purposes, you could serve from 1.5 to 5 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million pesos. For sensitive personal information, you can serve up to 2 to 7 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 2 million pesos. The next step after the use and access of personal data is the sharing and disclosing of personal data. There are also technical security measures and physical security measures for the sharing and disclosing of personal data. One of them is a practice of encrypting emails and encrypting personal data transmissions. It is important to use to, CC, and BCC fields wisely when sending personal data via email, so that you don't risk exposing other people's email addresses to others. Don't try putting up IDs, pictures, and documents with personal information on social media without the data subject's consent. You may be risking privacy breaches not just at work but also online. Let's now move on to the physical security measures. Some examples are the use of transmittal forms, sealed envelopes or boxes, and direct inquiries if properly received. There are designated officers or groups responsible for the establishment of security measures and controls the data lifecycle. We call them Personal Information Controller or PIC and the Personal Information Processor or PIP. For example, your head of human resources is the internal PIC, and your PIP is your third party who processes the payroll on behalf of the company. Now, not all sharing and disclosure are necessarily beneficial. Personal data can be shared for the wrong reasons, even malicious ones, and these are punishable with imprisonment and a huge fine. The malicious disclosure or disclosing or sharing of personal information with the bad or unlawful intention can get you 1.5 to 5 years of imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million pesos. For unauthorized disclosures, you can get up to 1 to 3 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million pesos, and 3 to 5 years in prison and a fine of 500,000 to 2 million pesos for personal information. Let's move on to another process, the retention of personal data. Personal data should only be kept long enough for it to fulfill its purpose for which it was obtained, for its establishments, exercise, defense of legal claims, for legitimate business purposes, or as provided by law. The data subject must be informed on how long their personal data is retained through a privacy notice or their consent. So how do we avoid causing any problems after the retention period? There should be a proper process of disposal or destroying personal data. To start, ensure not to use any personal data sheets as scratch paper. Some examples of disposing of and destroying personal data are using a shredder or tearing the data sheet so that it becomes impossible to recover. Another example is permanently deleting the data file in the recycle bin. The disposal of personal data improperly has penalties. You can get 6 months to 2 years of imprisonment and a fine of 100,000 to 500,000 pesos for the improper disposal of personal information. In the case of sensitive personal information, you can get up to 1 to 3 years in prison and a fine of 100,000 to 1 million pesos. The other important rights of data subjects are the right to damages and the right to file a complaint. For the right to damages, data subjects can claim compensation for damages. Incorrect or inaccurate personal data, which may be unlawfully obtained or used for unauthorized reasons, can be damaging to data subjects. The right to file a complaint. Should the personal data be mishandled maliciously or improperly disclosed in any way, or the data subject has been found his or her privacy rights to be violated, he or she has the right to file a complaint in writing addressed to the PIC or the data protection officer. Concealing security breaches is a violation. If it's found that there's a cover-up of non-security breaches involving sensitive personal information, you can get up to 1 year and 6 months to 5 years of imprisonment and a fine of 500,000 to 1 million pesos. For the violation of 2 or more punishable acts mentioned in this presentation, expect 3 to 6 years of imprisonment and a fine of 1 million to 5 million pesos. Security breaches do happen, and the important question is, what will you do if you know or witness a security incident in your company? First, let's define what exactly a security incident is. A security incident is an event that affects data protection or compromises the availability, integrity, or confidentiality of personal data. A data breach is a security incident that leads to accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure or access, or unauthorized processing of personal data and compromises personal data availability, integrity, or confidentiality. In short, it's a security incident that puts personal data at huge risk. Now, with these security incidents and data breaches in mind, it's important to know how to report them. When a security breach occurs, you must report the incident or data breach immediately to your department head and IT personnel if it involves electronic information or company devices. The department head will be responsible for assessing the nature of the breach and its resolution. If the incident is beyond his or her control, the breach shall be reported directly to the Data Privacy or Security Incident Response Team or to the Data Protection Officer. Congratulations! Now you know what data privacy is and what it means to uphold its laws. The final stretch is now putting your knowledge to the test. It's not enough that you just hear about data privacy, you must practice it. Good luck!